Hello guys, in this video we will look at OpenAPI and how to use it with HTTP API Gateway. OpenAPI, formerly known as Swagger, is an industry standard specification for describing, designing, documenting, and testing RESTful APIs. It provides a way to define the structure, endpoints, request-response formats, and other critical details of an API in a machine-readable format. OpenAPI acts as a blueprint, providing a clear and concise description of how the API works, what endpoints it offers, and what data formats it expects, and much more. Another significant advantage of OpenAPI is the ability to generate interactive documentation automatically. This documentation is a valuable asset for both developers and consumers, ensuring everyone stays on the same page. In one of the previous videos, we created a Lambda API service. So if we click on the routes, and we have a few routes here, but imagine that API may have a lot more of these routes, and typing them by hand will be a little bit of a chore. So that's why there is a feature in HTTP API Gateway of uploading OpenAPI. All right, but before we do that, we need to go ahead and create an OpenAPI document. We are in a VS Code, and before we're gonna start creating OpenAPI document, please be sure you have OpenAPI Swagger editor installed. This is by 42 Crunch. And don't forget to hit a subscribe button so I can help you with your future web and cloud development. In the root of your project, create a folder called OpenAPI or something similar, and then create a file, openapi.yaml or openapi documentation.yaml, and the idea is to put .yaml file because we're going to be writing Swagger or OpenAPI documentation in the YAML format. So let's start. So first you put OpenAPI and you put version. The current version is actually 3.1.0. However, the OpenAPI plugin works pretty well with a 3.0, right? And for our purposes, it really doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and create another servers, and you put description and you put a local dev server, right? And then you put an info, and in the info you put your title, your description, the version, contact. You can put a contact email, license. We'll use Apache 2.0 license. Now you create tags. In these tags, you're going to be creating the sections of your OpenAPI. So first name is going to be health, right? And description, this is the health route. The next one, name going to be message, and the description will be the message route, right? So finally we put posts, right? Because we had a posts endpoint, and we put description, the routes for the post resources. All right, so now we need to define the paths. All right, the first one was path health Z, as you remember, and we have a get endpoint, and here we're gonna put the tags, right? So, and we're gonna tag it with the health. So now we can put summary, operation ID. You just put health Z, description, check health of the application, and responses. So we're gonna have a 200 response, right? And then in description we say application is healthy, and then in content, you know, we're gonna put application JSON because it's gonna respond with a JSON, and in the schema we'll put required parameter was okay, right? And it was a boolean, it was okay, true, and then example true, right? And environment we put a type string, and we put an example as development. The next will be message, and we'll have name, right? Again, tags, we'll put messages, and tags help us to group the routes. In the security, now we're going to say the security will be bearer auth, and it will require permissions messages read, right? So summary, again, operational ID, description, and then parameters, we're going to have a parameter, right? And it will be in path, and the parameter name will be actually name, and then require true. Now we put schema, right? Schema will be string, and example will be world, right? So responses, we're going to have 200. Response successful, right? Content application JSON, schema required, we'll have a message as a required property, and the type will be string, and example hello world, right? And then in the defaults, we're gonna default it to the default error, right? Because if we don't get 200 response, we're gonna have an error response, which we define a little bit later. So far it's underlining it for us. So the next one will be API posts, right? We'll have a get route, and we'll put tags as posts, and security, again, bearer auth, and posts read, right? Will be permissions in the summary list posts, operational ID, description, and then parameters. We're going to have inquiry, and we'll create a parameter, right? Let's say page index, and it's going to be type of string and example one. So we're going to be creating like a simple pagination, right? And then another parameter, inquiry, will be per page, and the schema type will be string, and example will be 25. And then responses, again, 200 response successful. So will be application JSON, schema will be required, right? We'll have a posts properties, and it will be type array, and the items will be the components, the schema of post, which we again define later. Now we're going to have also 422 response, because, well, maybe when we get some kind of validation error, because when we're going to be creating the posts, right? So we will have an issue there. So and then default will be our default error. All right, so post, we put again the post endpoint for posts, right? So when we're going to be creating a post, so we put again bearer auth, post right, we'll need permissions. We're going to create a post, create post endpoint, right? Content, again, application JSON, type object, required will be title and a body, and then the properties will be title type string, and example will be my post, right? And the body, this is my cool post. All right, again, responses is 201 because it's going to be a post created response, and we're going to have a content application JSON schema, and it will be returning a created post, right? And we reference the schemas in post again. 422, again, if there is a validation error when creating a post, and then default will be default error, right? So now let's define those components. The first will be security schemes, right? And that's the bearer auth that we created. So type will be HTTP, scheme will be bearer, and bearer format will be JWT token. Now responses, right? So the default error that we created, so description will be default error response, and content, application JSON, and schema, we will define it a little later. We'll call it default error as well. And then validation error, again, validation error response, content, application JSON, schema will be validation errors. Now we're going to define the schemas. Let's put default error first. It will be object, and it will be required error property, and error will be type of object. We'll have a message in there, and it also we'll have an example that was an error processing your request, right? And we're also going to put a code, maybe, maybe we'll need a code, maybe not, so, but we won't put it as required, and then some kind of example of the code, right? And then the validation error, type object required error, we can put properties, and type object again required will be message and errors, and the properties message is a string, then, it's going to say validation error, and the errors array will have a following items as message and type, and then let's define a message and type. Message will be string with example property title is required, for example, and then type will be type string example any required, right? And the code, again, we may want to put a code in there. We'll put some code property, right? So now let's define the post schema. So it will be a type of object and will be required, and we'll have ID and title and body, and then the properties, let's define the properties. ID will be number, title will be string, and then body will be also string, right? So we created a simple OpenAPI document, and that's what the extension allows us to do. The one that we installed, it allows us to preview it, right? And this is basically the preview. So those are our tags, and there's our routes, right? So let's go ahead and test it locally, right? Because we put the localhost 3000. Let's spin up our dev local server. All right, and we're on the host 3000. So let's go ahead and click try it out. So this is the interactivity of OpenAPI documentation. And boom, and we got the response, right? Okay, environment true, and it says production because we have it in the env file, right? The same we can do with the message. So if we open message, right, we're going to have our required parameter that is in path. We can see the code 200 and then default error, and again we can test it locally as well. We'll click try it out, and the parameter is already pre-populated. We'll click execute, and we get the hello world back. Okay, now let's go ahead and upload OpenAPI document that we created to HTTP API Gateway. We are in API Gateway section on AWS, and let's go ahead and create a new API. And this will be an HTTP API. And we can call it OpenAPI Demo. All right, we click next, next, everywhere next, and we click create. Now we got our API created. So what we're going to do is click on re-import, right? And now we can select OpenAPI definition file that we just wrote. So click it up, right? It's here. You select it and it opened. All right. So it shows our document right here, cool API, and we click replace API. Right now we can go to routes and can see we have the routes right here, right? So let's go ahead and add integration to the routes, right? So we can do attach integration, right? So we're going to create the same way we did before. It's going to be Lambda. We choose the Lambda file, which will be Lambda API service, and we click create, right? So now we can go here, also select attach integration, and then as well for these two endpoints. Attach integration, and right here, finally, we're also going to attach the existing integration. Same way we did in the previous video. The next step, what we're going to be doing is creating authorization, right? So we don't have an authorizer here, so we need to create it first, and we're going to be doing JWT authorizer, and we're going to call it OpenAPI authorizer. Okay, it's going to be header request, right? And then let's put the issuer URL. It's going to come from the Cognito, the one we created in the previous video. And then in the audience, we're going to be using the ID, place the audience, and then we're going to hit create and attach. Now let's attach it to other routes. We're going to attach here. Get will be without authorization, and then messages, we also going to create and attach this authorizer for messages endpoint. As you may have noticed, we made a slight mistake actually, and we put posts under the API, right? But they're just by themselves. They're not under API, so we need to fix it. However, we cannot just go into OpenAPI document that we created and delete it and then import it again, because it will lose all these authorizations and integrations that we just created. So what we're gonna go to export, okay, and we want to have a YAML, and we click download. Now let's go to VS Code and look at the downloaded file in the VS Code. Here it is. And you can see it's a lot different from what we actually created, right? So, and also here, you know, it just looks like there's less information. It removed our example responses, and if we open it in the previewer, it looks, yeah, not so great, right? So it put our messages somewhere differently, right? And then again, the authorization that we have, right, it's not working. So what we have to do now is kind of work in both of these APIs, documentation files, right? First, you know, we can work in OpenAPI.yaml then create it, and then, you know, we can update this OpenAPI that we downloaded from AWS to make some updates if we need some updates, right? And as I said, right here, we now can delete and save. And the same with our OpenAPI. We can go ahead and delete API prefix. After we save it, we need to upload the document that we updated, this AWS document, back to AWS. Let's go ahead and do it. All right, we're going to go to reimport and then select OpenAPI definition, and now we can select this OpenAPI file, right? And then we can click replace API. Unfortunately, it doesn't let you add methods. You have to literally replace it, right? Now let's go to the routes, and we can see that the routes are still there, right? And they still have integration. Nothing got removed, right? And then if we go to authorization, authorization is still in place. And as you can see, the prefix from the post got removed as well. Let's go ahead and test the API. In the VS Code, in the OpenAPI file that we originally created, we need to add another part of the servers, right? We put description as AWS dev, and we put the URL here, right? Let's go ahead and save it. And this URL is from our API gateway. And let's go ahead and open it. Now, in a dropdown, we can select it, right? This is our AWS API Gateway endpoint, right? And here, what we're going to do, we're going to test the health Z. Now, we're not going to be calling it locally. We're just going to go and call it on AWS, right? Let's click execute. And as we can see, we got response and the body, right? Everything works. So now let's try the messages. However, with the messages, if we try it out, we are going to have a CORS issue, right? So what we need to do is to update CORS on the API gateway, so it will allow us to make the requests, right? Let's go ahead back to AWS. And in the gateway, we're going to go to CORS section, and we're going to click configure, right? And here we need to add a couple things, right? Here we put asterisks. We're going to be just allowing all the origins, right? So we click add. Don't forget to click add. Access control method, again, we're going to put asterisks here. And you see it got selected here, and then access control on the header, you can just put asterisks as well. And also don't forget to click add, right? So now you can click save. So it may take some time, you know, so you're gonna wait for about maybe a minute or so till this course, you know, will take effect. And then let's go ahead and check it again. We are back in the VS Code, and let's go ahead and try to click execute again. All right, and now we got a message unauthorized. So now we need the token to call the API, right? So we're gonna click and put the token right here. So now I'm gonna go and grab the token the way I showed you in one of my previous videos about Cognito and HTTP API Gateway. Then you can do the same, and we'll test it with a token. I got the token, and let's go ahead and paste it in here. We click paste, we click authorize, and we click close. So now let's go ahead and execute it. And as you can see, we got back hello world now, right? And if I put Alex and click execute, I'm going to get back hello Alex. So everything seems to work. And this is how you integrate OpenAPI documentation with your HTTP API gateway. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.